Hello everybody, my name is Haylee Collins and the woman that I am presenting on is Eliza Broadus. Eliza was born in 1851 into a Baptist family. Her father, John Broadus, he was a pastor in Charlottesville, Virginia in 1850, and while he was a pastor there, he became very famous. He was a famous preacher, a famous scholar, and actually, fun fact, he baptized Lottie Moon while he was a pastor in Charlottesville, Virginia. But many men in Eliza's life were prominent preachers and ministers. She came from a ministry family. Her uncles and her father and her grandfather, they were all somewhat involved in ministry, whether vocationally or not. They were all involved in ministry. And but we don't know much about the women in her life. We know that she had a mother. Her name was Maria Harrison. But in 1857, her mother passed away. And John remarried Charlotte Eleanor Sinclair in 1859. So we know that Eliza had a mother and a stepmother. And though we don't know a lot of information about the women in Eliza's life growing up, but they must have been influential and very special to her, because at 14, Eliza was baptized and she immediately began serving her church. So I like to think that they must have been a good influence on her and a good example for her to follow. But Eliza herself was known throughout her life, from a young age all the way until she died, she was known for her wise judgment and her self-sacrifice. But what Eliza was most well known for during her life was her work with the Women's Missionary Union. In 1877, her family, she and her father and her stepmother and all her siblings, they all moved to Louisville, Kentucky. In 1889, her father was actually elected as the second president of Southern, which is located in Louisville. She's most famous for her work in Kentucky. So really, when she moved to Kentucky was when her ministry that she is most famous for began. Even though she was serving faithfully in the church far before that, what she's most famous for is her work in Kentucky. She was a member of Walnut Street Baptist Church, where she eventually became a leader of the Missionary Society. So she led missions efforts, she educated children and women on missions, and she led the Missionary Society for that church. And in May 1888, at the annual meeting of the Southern Baptist Convention in Richmond, Virginia, the Women's Missionary Union was formed, and Eliza was part of the formation of the Women's Missionary Union. The WMU, it was established as an auxiliary to the SBC, and the WMU, it did not, and it still doesn't send its own missionaries or spend any of the money that they raise. It all goes to support the Southern Baptist Convention, specifically NAM and IMB. But the two goals of the WMU from the very beginning and to today was fundraising and missions education. And Eliza, as a leader of the Missionary Society at her church, was an obvious choice as one of the leaders in Kentucky for the WMU. When the WMU formed, Eliza was voted as the vice president of Kentucky. And as the vice president of Kentucky, Eliza was also passionate about the theological education of women. So she was passionate about missions and missions education and training missionaries, but she was also passionate about women's theological education. She helped establish a training school for women in Louisville connected to Southern to prepare women for Christian work. They realized when they would send female missionaries overseas, especially single female missionaries, because they were not attached to a husband. They didn't have a man in their life, but these women, they were sending them overseas to work with international people, to learn language and to learn culture, but they were not giving them any theological training. So they realized that there was a gap, and especially Eliza and other women like her realized that they needed some training before they went overseas or whatever other Christian work that God called them to do. There needed to be some sort of training. And Eliza specifically felt that Baptist women were responsible for supporting these female students, the ones who came to Louisville. Eliza and the WMU of Kentucky to support these female students who wanted training, they actually rented and furnished a home for these women who were attending this new training school. They would donate their own furniture. They pulled together their money and they paid the bills and furnished a house for these women who wanted to seek theological education. And eventually, Eliza actually urged the WMU and convinced them to take responsibility for this school and for this training. They eventually named it the WMU Training School in 1907. So though Eliza was part of starting it, she eventually convinced the WMU that this was something that they all needed to invest in. It was something important for women as a whole. And this training school was very influential in training women. The women were in separate classes from the men, but they were still training on Southern University's Southern Baptist Theological Seminary's campus. The training school, it was a 3-year program. So it included Old and New Testament. It includes Sunday school teaching. It included systematic theology, church history, and many other subjects. Honestly, as I was researching it, it sounded like a Master of Divinity. It was just wanting to give them a wide variety of training, because Eliza realized that was important for women too. Men were not the only ones who needed to be trained, but women as well needed to be trained. And that is what Eliza is still recognized for, and what she is still most famous for, is establishing that training school for women. In fact, today, the state of Kentucky honors Eliza with a missions offering. In 1913, through her WMU work, Eliza organized and established a state missions offering and a prayer season for Kentucky, for the state of Kentucky. And in 1976, over 40 years after her death, the state of Kentucky officially named this offering after Eliza. So it's now called the Eliza Broadus State Missions Offering, and its focus is at the end of August and the beginning of September, but it goes all year. So the state of Kentucky saw that this woman was special, that she was passionate, that God had called her to empower women to seek theological training. And they honored her with this offering. And I don't know about you guys, but as a fellow woman in seminary, I am thankful for her and for her efforts, because I see in her and her desire to seek theological training for women how far we've come today from even what she began. And I'm thankful for her efforts, and I'm thankful that Eliza established this training school, and I'm thankful for the WMU for supporting it as well. And I'm thankful that I got to present on this wonderful, wonderful woman of God, and that I got to learn so much about how influential she was in the theological training of women. Thanks.